Hello, my name is Indy Chawla. I'm Head of International Relations at the MLC, and I'd like to thank IMX for inviting you here today to speak to you about the MLC and explain its significance in the music and rights royalties landscape. So I'm going to share a presentation, so if you just bear with me, I'm going to share my screen. And then bring that presentation up. Okay, so what I'm going to do is to provide you with a brief overview of what the MLC is. We'll talk about membership of the MLC, so who actually needs to become a member of the MLC. We'll look at data management and royalties, and then what are the next steps if you're a songwriter or a publisher. Okay, so looking at the overview, well, the MLC itself was actually created pursuant to legislation in the US. It was actually created pursuant to the Music Modernization Act, or MMA, of 2018. And the Act actually sought to address the failure of the digital services to effectively license musical works and pay those corresponding royalties to songwriters and publishers. Now, the MMA is a very important change made to US copyright law. And one of the key things it changed was how mechanical licensing operates for digital uses of musical works. Now, the Act was made up of 3 titles, but the first one actually dealt with mechanical licensing. What it did, it created a blanket license for interactive streaming and downloads. It created or mandated the creation of an organization that would administer this blanket license. And it also mandated that this new organization should maintain a publicly available musical works ownership database. Now, before we delve into what exactly the MLC does, I think it's important to take a step back and look at some copyright basics. So in every sound recording, there exists at least 2 distinct copyrights. And when you stream a song on a digital service platform like Spotify, Apple Music, or Amazon, you are actually exploiting both the song and the recording copyright. The song on the left-hand side, we were referring to who actually wrote the music, the melody, or the lyrics. And then the recordings actually are created by artists, they're created by producers. So every time you record a track, you create a copyright, and that's usually owned by whoever organized their recording session. Now, musical works and sound recordings are both protected by copyright law, and the owner of the copyright has a right to do these things themselves or authorize others to do so. And in terms of key publishing rights in the US, the owners of the musical works, they have the right to authorize others to reproduce and distribute the work, so what we call the mechanical license, and also publicly perform the work. Now, examples of public performance include radio, it includes concerts, and it also includes streaming, so the performance. And actually, if you're a songwriter, if you do sign with a performing rights organization or a PRO, you will get at least 50% of your royalties directly from that PRO, even if you have a publisher or administrator. Now, reproduction and distribution of a musical work also requires permission from the copyright owner. And the license granting someone the right to do this is what we call the mechanical license. And examples of mechanical royalties can be generated from physical products. So we're looking at, say, vinyl or CD, when you reproduce and distribute copies. There's also permanent downloads. So, for example, iTunes, and then also interactive streaming and limited downloads. So by interactive streaming, what I'm actually referring to is where a consumer or user has the control over which recordings they wish to stream and the order in which they stream. So examples there, as you can see, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, and so on. Limited downloads actually refer to offline usage. So that's usually, for example, if you're listening on a music app, and you will have access to a particular recording for a limited amount of time. So that's an example there of limited downloads. Now, in 2018, the Music Modernization Act actually changed the process for mechanical licensing for the last 2 boxes on the slide, so for permanent downloads and the streaming and limited downloads. And this is where the MLC comes in. So before the Act, before the MLC, securing licenses was a completely inefficient process. The labels and digital services had to effectively seek licenses or seek a separate license for each musical work, which is extremely impractical when you have tens of thousands of tracks being uploaded to a service every day. In addition, there was no real public database of musical works where they could check who the copyright owners were. The whole system wasn't working very well, particularly for the digital services who were not paying out those royalties, but also for the rights holders who weren't actually getting paid. So since January 21, that whole system has been changed. Now, digital services, if they want to use any song on their platform, they can do, but they can do so under a blanket license. So they just now need to obtain one license. So definitely making this a more efficient licensing process. So that's exactly really what the MLC does. It is responsible for the processing and paying of royalties under the blanket license. So by law, if a digital service wants to use any song on their platform, they can, but they must abide by certain rules. All digital services over a certain size must send a notice of license to the MLC and submit all their usage data so we can match the sound recording usage to the musical works. They must also send us the corresponding royalties pursuant to the blanket license. The MLC will then pay our members who are publishers and self-administered songwriters and also CMOs. Importantly, the MLC is exclusive administrator of this new blanket license, so no other organization in the US can administer this license. From an international perspective, it's also important to note that the blanket license will cover any musical work, regardless of where the copyright owner is based. So if, for example, the songwriter was based in China and her song was streamed on a US digital service, then they are entitled to receive those royalties. So where does the MLC sit in the US landscape amongst all the other organizations when it comes to digital licensing? Well, digital services allow consumers to engage with music in different ways, which involve different rights and flows of royalties. And the flows are different for musical works and for sound recordings. The MLC, as you can see from the slide there, is part of the royalty flow, which is generated by the reproduction and distribution of musical works. The PROs, or the public performance rights, are on the left-hand side, and they are part of the flow generated by the public performance. The record distributors, aggregators, they're part of the flow generated by the reproduction and distribution of the sound recording. And then finally, on the right, you have Sound Exchange, which is part of the flow generated by the digital public performance of a sound recording. Now, if you're a songwriter, you'll definitely want to know the royalties flow for musical works on the left-hand side, but you'll also need to know the royalty flows for sound recordings if you are an artist as well. So I thought I'd just put some metrics before we finish this overview. Excuse me, as you can see there, we've now distributed over $1.2 billion since the MLC became operational since January 2021. We have an average of 89% match rate. We now have around 30,000 members with rights holders across 121 countries. We have 32 million works and rising in our database. And so far this year, we've received over 15,000 contacts from our support team. Okay, membership. So who should actually become a member? Well, it's basically anybody who has the right to collect the digital audio mechanicals in the US. That's often publishers, CMOs also have the right, but also sometimes songwriters. Now, I say sometimes because it really depends if that songwriter is self-administered. And by that, I mean they have no organization collecting their royalties, or they're collecting their mechanical royalties for them in the United States. If they do not have a publisher or CMO doing that for them, then they can join the MLC as a self-administered songwriter. It's easy to join. You just go to our website. You can sign up, click on the Connect to Collect button. Membership is free. Now, importantly, because the digital services cover MLC's operating costs, the MLC is actually able to distribute 100% of the royalties we receive. So we don't take a commission. And I believe that's the first place in the world where there's been royalty distributions for mechanicals or performances without there being a cost to the songwriter or publisher to do that. So data management and royalties. So one of the key data management tools you can use, anybody can actually use the public search. It's was mandated by the Music Modernization Act. This public database is available to anybody. You don't need a login. And you can search work data there, as you can see, by title, writer name, and so on. But when you become a member, you will have various ways to manage your data and access to various tools. So obviously, you need to also play your part to become a member. You need to make sure that your data is in our database, it's accurate, so that we can pay you for the usages from the digital services. So there's various ways you can claim your shares or register your songs. Also, if you are a member, you will have access to our matching tool. And what the matching tool does, it displays all the unmatched usages that the MLC has been unable to match. We allow therefore our members to view that data, and where possible, they can actually propose matches. So, for example, if they view a recording usage in there that they believe should be matched to one of their compositions, you can actually do that and propose a match. We will obviously verify that match, but there is that option available to members. Now, in terms of distributions, well, we actually made our first distribution back in April 2021 and have since then distributed over $1.2 billion. We issue royalty payments and statements monthly, usually 75 days following the end of each calendar month. Now, the royalty rates we do not set. They are set by the Copyright Royalty Board in the US, and that's basically a three-judge panel. The rates are reviewed every 5 years, and they determine what revenue share should be allocated by the services to the songwriters. Now, as I mentioned earlier, songwriters and publishers did complain for many years that the digital services were sitting on large amounts of money because they couldn't match that data, and they didn't know who the copyright owners were. So this slide actually reflects just that, i.e. the figure relates to unpaid funds that the digital services were sitting on. So 21 services submitted to us around $427 million of historical unmatched royalties. Now, this was required by law as one of the conditions for the digital services to get a limitation on liability for past infringement. And you can view the summary of the monies by the digital service and the date on our website. So that details all the historical unmatched royalties that the MLC received. We're already processing these monies, and everything we match rather, will be paid out to members with interest. So this slide summarizes what the MLC is actually processing. It's processing royalties from the historical periods, so before the MLC became operational, pre-2021, but also then post-2021 for the blanket royalties. Both historical and blanket royalties are identified. They are identified separately on member statements, and you can see also the usage period, what that relates to. Okay, so the last section. So what are the next steps for songwriters and publishers? Well, if you are a songwriter or publisher who has the right to collect digital streaming monies in the US, you need to check your administration status. If you are a publisher and you have an administrator in the US, then likely that you probably not need to join the MLC because they may be the member of the MLC already for you and are already paying royalties to you from the US. Either way, you can still check your works in the public database. Of course, if you don't have any representation in the US, then you can join the MLC as a publisher directly. If you are a songwriter who has no publisher or CMO collecting your mechanical royalties in the US, then you too can join as a self-administered songwriter. But even as a songwriter, if you are represented by other organizations collecting your mechanical royalties, you can still view the public database. As I mentioned, it's free. Anyone can view that database. So on that note, I'm going to end the presentation, but please do go to our website to find out more. And here's the link there. So it's www.bmlc.com. We're also everywhere over social media. But of course, you can always reach out to me should you have any questions. So thank you so much for listening. I hope you find it insightful. Thank you very much.